Well, gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for coming in.
Pleasure.
You guys aren't in Parliament, sadly. Richard, let me turn to you first. Are you disappointed?
Oh, of course I'm disappointed. You know, we didn't set out not to get into Parliament, and so when you reflect on what's probably a very intense year of campaigning and a lot of hard work on the ground with a lot of very good people, you do that with the goal of getting a seat or getting fair representation at the very least in Parliament. That hasn't happened, but that's not the be-all end-all. Obviously, at the same time, we had opportunity to put our ideas on the table and to campaign against many of the ideas that we have issues with as well. So in that sense, it was very rewarding, and once again, thankful for the opportunity to be out in the public domain, contending for what ultimately is the direction our country would take and the kind of future we're setting up for our children.
Because, I mean, it's punishingly hard work, isn't it? I mean, just the time that you spent, you must feel like you haven't had a life for the last few months.
Well, that's the life you choose, really. If you're going into politics, that's what becomes your life. I think it's disappointing because you listen to the radio now, you hear the legislation going through an urgency, and you know what could have been achieved. You know that we could have been seeing legislation dealing with abortion, dealing with the Prostitution Act, dealing with the anti-smacking law and so on, and that's what you work for, and you don't get that opportunity for another 3 years, really.
How much do you think you were victims of the fact that people were obviously keen for change? They wanted to change and they wanted to make sure that National got in and that they didn't fall because they were voting in lots of different ways. Do you think you were victims of that, Richard?
Oh, I do. It was obviously there was a massive tide for change, and all of the minor parties effectively suffered for it. You've seen parties that have been around for a while, such as New Zealand First, no longer exist in Parliament. So that was a major issue that we were obviously contending with for minor parties outside of Parliament trying to break in.
Would you have done anything differently? If you, let's say in 3 years' time you go for it again, will you do anything differently to what you did last year?
Well, I think sometimes when you run a campaign, you know that in the same campaign in another circumstance could produce a much different result. But I think we worked very hard last year to try and have only one vehicle because that was a message we'd heard very clearly. And I think you know, it's regrettable that we didn't achieve that because that's one of the major stumbling blocks. I think there's two. There's that perception amongst Christians that unless we're all working together and happy and harmonious, then they won't support any party. And secondly, the threshold. It's a real killer. 5% is a tough challenge, and or winning a seat. And we've all seen how difficult that is. For me in Tauranga, you know, once Winston Peters returned to the scene, it became very difficult there as well. So I think going forward we have to be realistic about what we do put our energy and time and talent and money and so on into, and ask people for support into, because the prize is pretty big.
Yeah.
You know, playing a role and having influence in Parliament is what we all want, and I don't think we should keep going through these kind of results forever.
Are we unrealistic to even consider having a united Christian party when there are as many political flavours of Christian as there are everybody else?
Well, I don't think it's realistic to ever think that Christians are all going to vote the same. Yeah. They're going to have different opinions, they're going to vote across the spectrum. But New Zealand is the only country in the world that has an MMP system and doesn't have a party like what I would say like the Kiwi Party, a party based on Judeo-Christian values. They're representing people who share those values. Richard would say a Christian party. I think our dilemma is which one, you know, which model is what the church wants. And I would actually like to see, perhaps in the next year or even sooner, some kind of survey done whereby we can ask the church, look, we know you're not all going to vote for one party, but if there are a significant number of you that want a party to represent the values we hold dear, what model would you support? And then I know I'd be prepared to say, well, whatever the outcome of that survey, if they say they want a Christian party, faith-based, like Richard leads, or they want a party like ours, which is values-based, not overtly Christian, then let's go with that. And I'll lay down, you know, Kiwi Party for what the church wants, because at the end of the day, they're the voters, they hold the power, and we are sort of killing ourselves trying to present something to them that maybe they don't want. And if they said we don't want either, well, I think we probably need to be realistic about that. It's going to be very difficult to get 5% if you don't have a significant amount of support from the church. Not complete support, but a significant amount.
All right, just briefly, our time's nearly at an end, but just briefly, what should we as Christians in the church, what should we be doing over the next 3 years?
Well, you do have to contact your MPs. I mean, they are the elected ones. We have a new Prime Minister. I think he has basically a decent heart to do the right thing for the country. So you've got to contact them. The Christian MPs we know of, you know, we should write to them, support them, pray for them, but also alert them to what we really want to see happen. There are things that can't be ignored. Our statistics, Alan, are shocking. You know, again, our child abuse, or now this whole issue of putting babies into daycares, you know, and we do nothing about it, really. So we've got to keep our voice heard. Bob McCoskrie does a great job putting issues out there and so on. All of that's got to continue. But at the end of the day, it's the people in there around that table that are voting for the things that count, and we need to be there, we really do.
You'd back that?
Yeah, I do, and I think if anything, an awareness coming from the Christian community towards things political, as far as the people involved, the decisions being made, the legislation on the table now, stuff that's been passed and stuff in the pipeline. It's sort of a domain we haven't really fully engaged in. So when we've come to understand how much impact it really does have on our nation, but then when you personalise that in terms of families and the kind of future we're creating for our kids, we've got to be active in the political domain, and from a political point of view as well as a lobby point of view, it's all very, very valid. But I still firmly believe that there's a place in New Zealand politics for a Christian political vehicle.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Alan.
We'll see you in 3 years.
Well, maybe a few times before that.